Hi guys, welcome back to the Clonestar podcast. My name is Sho Hurley and I'm joined today by my co-host Jodie Pickens. Jodie, how are you today?
Doing great, show. Thank you.
This week our guest is a New York Times best-selling author. He has written the novelization of multiple movies including Man of Steel, The Dark Knight Rises and War for the Planet of the Apes. He is also an author of multiple Star Trek books and his latest book, Lost to Eternity, is available now. Our guest this week is the wonderful Greg Cox. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. And
Greg,
looking forward to talking to you.
How many Star Trek books is it now that you've written?
Okay, I think at this point we're talking 19 novels plus miscellaneous novellas, novelettes, short stories, cover copy, etc. It's sort of horrifying to realize that indeed I have been writing Star Trek novels for more than 30 years now.
Oh my word.
Which is not quite half my life, but close enough, you know.
I think what's actually more shocking, Greg, is that means that was only like 1994, and to me 1994 is still only 10 years ago and not 30 years ago, so there's kind of that as well. Like, Greg, what brought you to Star Trek originally? Like, were you a fan all of your life, or did you just one day wake up saying, Christ, I can make money off this Star Trek thing, I'm going to write 19 books?
No. I honestly cannot remember when I was not a Star Trek fan. I have dim memories of my dad letting me stay up past my bedtime to watch the original series during its original run on NBC. And of course, the syndicated reruns, were running in the background of my entire childhood, adolescence. I discovered organized Star Trek fandom in college back in the 80s. And my not so guilty secret is I would still be watching Star Trek religiously, standing in line on opening night to see the movies, even if I wasn't a professional Trekkie.
And I'm going to ask you the really lousy question, Greg. Which is your favorite show to write books on?
Oh, that's an easy one. I have watched all the shows religiously during their original runs, but no, like I said, I grew up on TOS. TOS is the episode, those 79 episodes are burned into my brain. So yeah, TOS is my comfort zone. That's my Star Trek, and that's not a diss of the later ones. I'm, counting the days until Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds comes back. But left to my own devices, no, Star Trek is Kirk, Spock, McCoy, etc. That's the Star Trek I grew up on. I was actually an adult and already writing books by the time the latter day stuff came along. So.
And how did the opportunity come up to write, say, for Star Trek originally?
Okay, well, I had already been working in science fiction publishing as a writer and editor for some time. At that point, I indeed was working full-time 9 to 5 as a science fiction editor for Tor Books, which is one of the leading American science fiction publishers. As it happened, at one point when I was working at Tor, one of my colleagues was John Erdover. We were assistant editors at Tor together. John eventually went on to become the editor of the Star Trek line of books. John knew I was a lifelong Trekkie. We'd gone to go see the movies together before either of us did this professionally. And basically, Deep Space Nine gave me my foot in the door. Suddenly, Deep Space Nine was in the works. Pocket Books had to launch a whole new line of Star Trek novels on top of the two they already had, and they realized that basically they needed to expand their stable of authors. As it happened, I had just recently written a couple of Batman tie-ins for DC Comics. John Ordover had read those and called me up and, hey, Greg, there's this thing called DS9 coming up. You interested, basically. I need some new writers. Okay, John and I went way back. We were Trekkies together. We'd worked together in the past. I was already doing Batman tie-ins. So from there, I jumped to Deep Space Nine, and the rest is history.
So your first Star Trek book was a DS9 book then, is that right?
Yes, one of the early ones, Devil in the Sky, which was actually a collaboration with another author, John Gregory Betancourt. There's too many Johns in this story. We actually started working on that book before the show even aired. Pocket Books wanted to hit the ground running with the novels, so I was
So
sent the I
I was
was
about
sent
to
the
say,
script for the pilot episode. We were sent the Bible, and we got going on the book
so you
before
hadn't
the
seen like you hadn't seen Emissary, you'd seen nothing. So you had to basically off the script create the dynamics, the characters in your own head, kind of thing.
starting off. By the time we finally got around to, finishing the book, the show had debuted, so I got to watch a few episodes. But yeah, no, the outline. We wrote the outline, started writing the book before the show aired, and yeah, besides having the script for the pilot, and besides having the Bible, of course, I was reading Starlog magazine and TV Guide and devouring everything I could learn about the show. So, but yeah, we sort of, same thing happened with Voyager, by the way, my first Voyager book. Again, I got, recruited to write a Voyager novel before the show debuted. So at least I dived in and got going. Eventually, the books take a while to write. Eventually, the show aired, so I got to see a few episodes before I actually had to turn it to manuscript. But again, the idea was to hit the ground running.
So with your ideas for the DS9 book and the Voyager book, say when you were originally planning it out before any of the episodes you'd seen and things like that, how close were your approximations of the characters to what the actors eventually kind of brought to the roles?
Well, I will admit that, like I said, I did not have a handle on Dax. Neither Betancourt nor I could get a handle on Dax. And I would argue that Dax didn't really get a recognizable personality until about season 2 or so. I remember actually after we turned in the manuscript, our editor bouncing it back to us, telling us, you have to do more with Dax, because we basically couldn't figure her out, so we didn't use her. And you have to use Dax. Okay. The other thing that's kind of funny is to this day, people occasionally complain about that book, that Kira is too mean to Bashir in that book. And the reason for that is, remember, we were going from the first script for the first episode. And when they first meet each other, when Kira and Bashir first meet, she basically tears him a new one. Well, okay, we jumped on that and ran with it. Now, years down the road, we know them to become close colleagues, but just on the basis of that one scene in the pilot, Kira doesn't like Bashir, so we really ran with that, and that was a hook, and nowadays, like, why is Kira so mean to Bashir in your book?
I had one scene to base this all on.
Kind of made that their whole relationship.
What about your Voyager approximations then, Greg?
Okay, my one regret in hindsight on the Voyager approximation is if I had known just how great a character the EMH was going to be, I would have used him a lot more. And indeed, by the time I was still working on the book, I realized that, oh my God, Robert Picardo is great as the EMH. I was trying to find places to insert him in, but originally just looking at the outline, and the Bible, there wasn't much. You don't know. Indeed, the Bible for Voyager really didn't bear much of resemblance. Tuvok was supposed to be an older fellow who was a mentor to B'Elanna. You remember that, right? And the EMH was called Doc Zimmerman.
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah, I remember
right.
Doc Zimmerman.
So reading the outline, the EMH did not leap up to me as being the breakout character of the series, in my opinion, at that point. So yeah, I remember writing the book, even as I was writing it, kind of wishing that back when I did the outline way back, months earlier, that I had given the EMH more to do. And of course, this was a Kess era book, so of course, I actually I got in under the wire to do one of the more Kess centric novels, because Kess seemed very interesting. So she's on the cover of the book. So,
word. And Greg, with this book, then you came up with the idea in 2020. Is that right? And what brought you to the idea for this book?
Well, for those who don't know it, a good chunk of this book is set in 2024 now.
Oh, hang on. One thing before we go any further. This episode is full of spoilers. If you haven't read the book, do not watch the rest of this until you've read it, because we're not holding back anything at all here. It's all spoilers. We're talking about the entire book. Sorry, Greg. I had to just say that because I forgot to say it a few minutes ago.
And just to be clear, this is not a spoiler because it's established it's on the back cover copy and it's in chapter 1. But a good chunk of this book takes place in 2024. Now, it involves a modern day true crime podcaster who is doing a new series on the mysterious disappearance of Gillian Taylor, a certain marine biologist who mysteriously vanished in 1986. And I can tell you the genesis of this book, I remember the moment. My wife and I were at that point listening to lots of true crime podcasts like Serial. That was back when Serial was the biggest thing in the world. And at some point it occurred to us, oh, wouldn't it be funny if someone did one of these podcasts about, Gillian Taylor's, Gillian Anderson's X-Files, mysterious disappearance. And I remember my wife was, oh, that's great. You got to do that book. And well, here we are 4 years later. And yeah, a good third of the book involves my intrepid podcaster, Melinda Silver, trying to figure out just what went down in San Francisco in 1986, nearly 40 years ago.
Oh God, Greg, why are you aging all of us here? Like when saying it's nearly 40 years ago already.
Well, that's one of the responses I've been getting from the moment this book was announced. It was like, 40 years ago? Oh God, the whale movie was 40 years ago. And that was something I had to keep mentally adjusting in my own head when I wrote the book and realizing, wait, Gillian's boss, and again, this is the first chapter, Gillian's boss, the asshole who she slaps at the Marine. I'm like, oh wait, he would be how old now? Okay, he's surely not, still working there. He's in his 70s. He's retired, and I had to keep doing the mental leap of, oh wait, the old lady who got the kidney pill, she is surely not with us anymore. Even with a new kidney,
Actually, when I started reading the book and I started reading the first paragraph, I was, because it's set in 2024, and the way you opened it up, I didn't think podcast. Now, I'm showing my age here. I thought that we were about to find out somebody was watching an episode of Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack from the late 1980s, talking about the disappearance of Gillian Taylor. And I was there going, oh my God, Greg Cox is an Unsolved Mysteries man. I was there, this is so cool. And then when it turned into a podcast, all right, well, that actually makes a lot of sense, but I was still hoping for an Unsolved Mysteries connection there, because I still rewatch Unsolved Mysteries now and again because it was absolutely terrifying, and I'm a huge fan of it and things like that. So in terms of the story of the book, we're set in 3 different time periods. We're set in current day 2024, we're set in 2268, in the third year of the USS Enterprise's 5-year mission, and then in 2292, after the collapse of the Klingon Empire and Romulan Star Empire alliance, just before the explosion on the Klingon moon of Praxis, we have two connecting kind of threads, but one main one throughout all 3 time periods, which is a man trying to find effectively immortality. And Greg, it's an interesting one in terms of, this to me was a brilliant page turner for so long, because chapter 1 would be 2024, chapter 2 2268, chapter 3 2292, chapter 4 back to 2024. So you'd be constantly getting pulled along, because you'd end a chapter in 2024 and be going, oh God, what's going to happen next? But then I'd read the next chapter on 2268, and it kept on repeating, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. What was the decision to kind of frame it that way, instead of just saying, okay, I'm going to do everything from 2024 here, 2268 here, 2292 here? Why did you kind of chop and change? Not saying it's bad, I thought it was brilliant, but what was the reason in your head to do it that way?
Well, I will confess here, and I've mentioned this before, that in fact, that's how I wrote the book. Chronologically, I wrote the 22. There's 3 eras, basically today, the TV era, the 5-year mission, and then the movie era with Saavik. I wrote them honestly consecutively. I wrote them, and then the last thing I did was then sort of shuffle chapters to get the sort of ABC pattern going. And I guess the reasoning was, maybe I kind of wanted to get to the actual Star Trek-y stuff faster. I mean, just in case, fortunately, people seem to be responding very well to the 2024 storyline, but I could see, well, wait a minute, this is a Star Trek novel. Maybe you shouldn't have to read, 100 pages, before you get to Kirk and Spock, and the Enterprise and Klingons and, transporter beams. So, and again, I kind of like the idea of just, A plot, B plot, C plot, A plot, B plot, C plot, and jumping back and forth to kind of keep the variety going. That's actually kind of the structure I've used for my previous 2 Star Trek novels as well, where in that case I didn't do it chronologically. I had 3 different storylines on 3 different planets, and planet A, planet B, planet C. I thought I would mix things up this time around instead of separating the plot lines geographically across the cosmos. Oh, let's do it in time rather than space. So a storyline in 3 different time eras, and they bounce back and forth. And yes, spoiler, inevitably they all kind of converge and connect in ways that will hopefully be surprising and unexpected. Yes, But that was sort of
what makes you, because this is kind of your wheelhouse to do these different time periods. So it's kind of become, you think that's a niche for you?
It's not deliberate, but you're right. I know, but I tend to keep gravitating to that. I go back to the eugenics wars. I did a book about Sean Christopher and his voyage, his manned mission to Saturn. For some reason, I love connecting our present day world as seen, the present according to Star Trek, and regular Star Trek. I don't know why I keep gravitating back to that, but I keep sort of for some reason I sort of find that sort of interesting as to what whatever they drop these things, whatever happened to Sean Christopher's Saturn mission. Hey, what about the eugenics wars? Let's flesh that out. Say, what was the aftermath of the whale movie, and how did people respond to a woman growing a kidney overnight in a matter of minutes? And there's a plot here. It's all about getting entire novels out of 2 lines for an episode or a movie.
I have to agree with the show. I really enjoyed the pacing of it and jumping from those different 3 eras back and forth. It just made it a page turner. It was really fun as a reader. So I really appreciated that.
Well, Greg, I have to give out to you about it, Greg, actually, because the problem is you'd finish a chapter and you'd say, I have to find out what's going to happen, next. So you have to get through 2 more chapters, and then you'd read the 4th chapter. But then you'd better go, but wait a second, though, I can't leave 2268 out because I have to know what's going on there. So I tried to break it and just say, I'm going to read 3 chapters. I'm going to do it in numbers of 3. So if I read 3 and I go to 4, I have to go to 6. And if I go into 7, I have to go to 9. I couldn't actually leave it because I said, no, if I pick up the wrong place now, no, this won't work for me at all.
I wonder if there will actually be people who decide they're just going to read one storyline. One of the reasons why I wrote it, by the way, chronologically, even though as I joke, the book I wrote is actually not the book that's published, because I wrote the book straight through and then trampled the chapters. And the reason for doing that was simply, for me, it's easy. I wanted to keep the momentum going. I didn't want to have to keep mentally shifting gears every time I switched it. Wait, where did I leave things in 2016 again? Let me get back into that TOS groove again. Just to sort of, keep the momentum going. I would write them each consecutively, and then, like I said, then I, shuffled them. And that was an interesting experience, because that was a challenge, because invariably I had to sort of nip and tuck things a little bit to make them fit. And I can't mention this here because that gives away a spoiler later on in one of the other storylines. I had to but it was interesting reading it through, realizing that reveals were dropping in different places than I had sort of imagined, because this character is actually introduced in the future before we meet him in the past, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that was a whole sort of interesting. I deliberately budgeted myself like 4 or 5 days to do that, because I knew I would be pulling my hair out at some point. Just as I literally wrote, every chapter down on an index card and just kept shuffling. And there were lots of charts and diagrams, and it was all
There's a method.
Yeah, there's a method to the madness, that situation.
Yeah.
Jody, I interrupted you. You were about to ask this question there a minute ago. I'm really sorry. Go ahead. Oh, did I freeze?
Go ahead. You're fine.
No. After you, Jody. You had a question and I interrupted, so please work away.
I was just going to ask, so I know you said that, it kind of clicked to set this in 2024 with a podcast element to do the research, but what made you choose the voyage home? as kind of the focus?
Well, first of all, like I said, that's, it started with literally us listening to true crime stories. And, that's the one where a young blonde woman mysteriously disappears in California, which is the stuff of the true crime videos and podcast. Beyond that, I love the Whale movie. It's my second favorite Star Trek movie after Khan. So, yeah, not exactly a hardship to have to go back and rewatch the Whale movie over and over again and, taking notes and everything. So
I do think that readers are going to love that. I think they're going to realize that, this is digging into that movie, and I think people are going to love that part of it. I did.
I do seriously recommend that probably
brush up.
If you have seen this movie. I was actually at a convention recently, just a few weeks ago, and a person who was not well versed in Star Trek was asking me which of my books, which I had lovely displayed on a table, should she read. And I actually asked her, have you seen the fourth movie, the Whale movie? Blank look. Oh. Okay, but this is probably not, as much as I want to plug the new book, this is probably not the book for you, if you're not well versed in the Whale movie. And I gave her the Antares Maelstrom, which is more just straightforward, If you want an introduction to Star Trek novels, this is not the one. Okay.
It's actually interesting that, like, as you're both saying there a minute ago, like, as the 2024 storyline was going through and Melinda is interviewing so many people for the podcast, you're trying to anticipate in your head who else can she possibly speak to that would have interacted with this story. And was there anyone you left out? Because I don't think there was, even like down to the people running who were blown away by the the breeze of the Klingon bird of prey taking. Yeah, the joggers. Yeah. And I was there going, he's actually nailed everybody here. I think the joggers surprised me the most, because I was there going, wow, I didn't think now he'd actually go to that one. But everyone else seemed to be caught, with the exception, the only person I was there going, could have included the cop that Chekhov and Uhura asked, but I was there going, that would be the biggest stretch, I think, and I don't think it kind of played into the story. Was there anyone that is left out, Greg?
Well, now that you mention it, I hadn't thought in these terms, but I guess I left out the bus driver who kicked them off the bus for not having the exact change.
Oh, yeah.
But I even kind of invented a few characters, like the waiter at the pizza restaurant who saw Jillian having a mysterious unidentified man the night before she disappeared, But yeah, I got the nuns. I got the Russian whaler. I got,
They're all there.
The Russian whaler did surprise me now. I was not expecting that at all. I was there going, oh my God, it's so obvious, but it didn't occur to me that you were going to pick the Russian whaler as well.
Clearly, like I said, I was watching the movie and taking notes, and I even looked up the actress who played the nun at the aquarium, So.
Nice.
And Greg, why these exact time periods? So why 2024? Why 2268 in the third season of the original series? And why 2292 before Star Trek 6?
Well, to a certain degree, like I said, 2024, I'll be honest, I had no idea when I wrote that book that would be literally the year it came out. Just, delays and things. I'll be honest, when I set the book in the near future, I chose 2024 because I started writing this at the very onset of the pandemic. You remember the pandemic. And there was sort of a hope that, okay, do I need to have Melinda running around wearing masks and social distancing? And I could have took the gamble, if I have her wearing masks, is that going to seem dated? When the book, because books take a while to work their way through approvals and copy edits and revisions. So I kind of decided, okay, I'm just going to decide that in 2024, for better or for worse, people aren't going to be wearing masks anymore, and the height of the pandemic will have passed, and I don't have to have, Melinda locked up in her room, doing everything virtually and worried about social distancing. So that way, and ironically enough, because of just the publication process, the book ended up being published in 2024. So as for the other two, well, it's just, the actual dates weren't all that important. I wanted a TOS era, and I wanted a classic 5-year mission story. And I tend to set things after the third season because that means I can just reference anything that previously we've seen in the series. And then I wanted a movie era storyline because I like writing in the movie era, and that hasn't been explored too much. But honestly, there's not a lot of opportunities to stick a standalone adventure into the movie era.
Mhm.
The only way two places you can do it are between the first and second movie, or between the fifth and sixth movie, because
Yep.
2, 3, 4 kind of follow one after another. So
Mhm.
when I'm doing the movie era, I almost always zero in on somewhere between Star Trek V and Star Trek VI, which is the last adventure. So you're on the Excelsior A. You can use Savik if you want to use her, and so that was sort of, and the Klingon Empire has not fallen apart yet, and they haven't made peace with the Klingons yet. So, like I said, there's a window there between Star Trek V, Sybok, and all that, and Star Trek VI, which is where they're all getting together for their last mission, where you can stick a standalone movie era book. And that was pretty much the extent of my reasoning there.
Is it difficult kind of creating new stories around these, legend characters, right? They're legendary characters, and I'm just curious about, I think it's a unique perspective you brought in, with the movie era tagging around the series, but I'm just curious if it gets challenging at all for you.
Not really, not to pat myself on the back too much, but I've been writing media tie-in novels, as noted, for more than 30 years now. I've done Batman, I've done the X-Files, I've done Superman. So I am not intimidating. Oh my God, I have to write Zorro or Captain Kirk or whoever. So the trick is to try to put your own spin on it. And also, at this point, as mentioned, this is Star Trek novel number 19. One of my own personal motives as an author is, okay, what haven't I done yet? I try to avoid repeating myself. So, I haven't done much with Savik, so I'm going to do a Savik book. Oh, I haven't done a McCoy-centric book, so a few books back I decided I'm going to write a McCoy-centric story. I'm looking for things I haven't done, which is maybe also I'm looking for perhaps weird corners of the Star Trek timeline that haven't been explored ad infinitum. So, oddly enough, Jillian Taylor hasn't been used much. She's made a handful of appearances in the books and comics over the years, but not a lot. So it's like, that's kind of, that hasn't been done to death. So I'm going to go in and, do something with Jillian. And of course, I do research. I go memory and beta. Okay, Chris Claremont used her a little bit in a graphic novel back in the 90s. She made a cameo appearance in a DC comic a while back. But really, there hasn't really been a novel about Jillian. And honestly, there hasn't been a whole lot of books about Savik. I'd only done Savik once before in a novella several years ago. So again, that was looking for something I hadn't done myself already is a big motive at this point,
I'm actually just literally scraping off some questions I had, Greg, because you've preempted them already and have actually been giving me answers to what I've been asking.
I've been doing a lot of panels and discussions about
just in terms of the time periods, especially 2268 and 2292, and look, as you said, the characters backwards, you've written about them and things like that. When you're writing, say, about a Kirk in third season TOS versus a Kirk after Star Trek V, what difference do you see between the two of them?
Well, the Kirk we see in the movie era is perhaps a little more, thoughtful, reflective. He's an older man, Certainly Spock changes probably the most. By the time you get to the movie era, post TMP, Spock has kind of come to terms and made his peace with his, half-human nature. You have less angst about that. One of the few good scenes in the fifth movie is there's the scene where Sybok tries to, confront him with, "Oh, you're a child of two worlds," and and Spock is like, "Been there, done that. That was an issue when you knew me when I was a young man. I now kind of, made my peace with being half human, and he's no longer embarrassed by his human side. So that button you can't push anymore, dude." So that's one thing. And of course, you can't write Chekhov as a green young kid anymore in the movie era. Back when Chekhov is another character. You're doing TOS. He's the impetuous young ensign. He's the green young kid. By the time you get in the movie era, he's head of security, and you can't write him as quite this impulsive young man.
Yeah.
So, what about creating the new alien kind of species in this? I'm going to pronounce it wrong. Is it the Osori?
That's how I had heard it in my head. Yes.
Okay, good. That's how I pronounced it while reading, so I feel better about that. What's it like to create? What's your process to create a new alien species for?
To a certain degree, it's about what serves the plot, and then also how to add some nice frills to make them interesting. But given in this case that a lot of it is dictated from the original idea, once I decided I'm doing a plot that starts in 2024 and extends over hundreds of years, well, that's where suddenly immortality and longevity become a theme, because how else am I going to have continuing storylines, that a story in 2024 that hooks up with a story, in the 23rd century. So yeah, by that point, immortality becomes a theme, longevity becomes a theme. So thereby stands to reason that, okay, well, I need an alien race that is all but immortal. And what does that mean? And what is their technology like? And how are they going to react? So I start with sort of the plot and then design the alien to fit the plot, honestly.
I like to ask this too, because I'm fascinated by it, but how do you come up with the name of the species?
I was about to ask that question, actually, Jody. I was about to jump in and say not just the name of the aliens, but the names of the characters as well, yeah.
Yeah.
Coming up with weird alien names is a challenge. I will say one thing I am aware of now that the books are all being turned into audio. As you mentioned, well, how do you pronounce that? Having gotten a few calls from the audio people over the years about how do you pronounce such and such, I am now much more conscious of the fact that some poor actor, hi Robert Petkoff, is going to have to actually pronounce these lines. So maybe not, well, asterisk double helix, C25. Okay, right. Make these names pronounceable. Basically just fiddling around with letters, looking at, failed answers when playing Wordle.
Yes.
The main thing I try to keep consistent is that if I'm creating a new alien species, that the names all sort of sound like they come from the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Same sort of, they are not. Also, if there's multiple aliens, and see, if I've got, alien race A and alien race B, okay, let's, make the names, give each of them their own kind of sounds so that readers won't get confused. So alien races, A's names will be very heavy on consonants, alien race B's name will be very heavily on vowels. I'll use hard sounds for one alien race and soft sounds for the idea. So being that when the character starts speaking, they're not just randomly writing gibberish. The Osori names all sort of sound like they're cut from the same cloth, and ditto the sort of aliens on the other planet Atraz, which is in the 5-year mission storyline. Yep. Those names should all sort of sound like they're cut from the same cloth and not sound too much like the Osori names.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also make sure that I also watch the capital letters to make sure, just as a rule of all books, that I don't have too many characters who have names who sound like the same thing. On other days, wearing different hats, I'm a book editor. And one of my pet peeves is authors who decide they're going to write a book where you have Joan, Janet, and Jill in the same novel. Why would you do that? You'd be surprised how many authors have, John, Jack, and Jeremy in the same book. I keep a list, so I'm not going to have, Zeb, Zagag, and Zorro all in the same book.
Yeah.
You'll notice even in this book, the Klingons don't all have names that start with K. Because there's a lot of Klingons in this book. And I'm trying to make life easy for the readers. They're not trying to remember the difference between Croc, Kriaz, and Kreese, the entire book.
Let's help Robert Petkoff off a small bit here. So we've got Wilmer Offfoot, is it? Or how did you go with that when you were trying to get it in the book?
Orlando Wilder or Wilder Offit. Well, that was me. Oh, right, you're right. But that was just me being cute. We have a character who goes by multiple names.
Yes.
And in that case, I was, I just flipped the vowels. Willard Offit is also Orlando Wilder. I just switched the OW thing to kind of, hint signal they're the same character.
So in 2268, we've got a character Yorba. So I'm pronouncing Yorba correctly, I'm guessing. Yes.
Yes.
Yorba is right. Jahid.
Jahil. Is it Jahil or Jahid?
Jahid, I think.
I tinker with these. You have to remember, I wrote this book. I wrote this book some time ago, so.
Because I was trying to make sure that, like, as I was going through the book, that I was pronouncing it correctly myself as I was going through it. As Jody said, it's Sirath, obviously. It's a TH at the end of it. Then is obviously in 2268. Now, hang on a second. Is it Silu or is it Kailu? I'm guessing it's Silu from 2292.
Silu in my head, yeah.
Silu. Gledy. Gled.
Yeah. Believe it or not, I actually have to deal with this because part of the process these days is the nice people at the audio company come to me and ask me to provide a pronunciation guide. This has now become part of the ritual.
Very good.
That I have to actually sit down and send them a pronunciation guide before they film. And so, like I said, sometimes I decide this as I'm writing the pronunciation guide for the audio people. So, I'm much more conscious to make sure these things are pronounceable, and I'm not just, QYZLZ. Yeah, right, of course.
The last name I have to check with you then, Greg, is we have Plavius. Now, it's either Plavius or it's Plavius, and I couldn't work out which one.
I think in my head it was Plavius.
And I went with Plavius the whole time, so it's all lies. It's all lies. It's all wrong.
I honestly don't remember what I told the audio people, and I have not had an opportunity yet to listen to the audio book. So
it'll be a surprise.
Yeah, but maybe it is Plavius. I don't know. That was me coming up of a Romulan name, and again trying to make all the Romulan names not sound the same, but also vaguely Romulan-ish.
And Greg, I suppose another question I had then is, obviously, look, we know what happened to Gillian Taylor because we've watched Star Trek 4 and things like that, but in the book, obviously, everywhere Melinda and Dennis go, it's going to lead to it being a dead end. And like, this is before we encounter our kind of antagonist in the book and things like that. How did you kind of work around it, saying, okay, I know no matter who they talk to, it's not going to give them the answers they want, because they'll never ever know what actually happened. But you kept it engaging, you kept it interesting. How did you approach that and say, I need to make sure that I keep everyone involved, even though they know that Melinda won't ever get the right answer? But how did you say, I'm going to keep this engaging for the reader?
Well, there were two things. Yeah, I was conscious of the fact that I'm writing a mystery where basically the reader is going to be way ahead of Melinda at every point. But in fact, I tried to the fact that she does keep learning new things, and there are new discoveries. It doesn't like she meets somebody and he throws up his hands. No, she suddenly discovers. She starts making more and more connections and discovering that the picture is what happened back in 1986 was much weirder than she imagined. There was all sorts of strange stuff going on that she did not know about. She doesn't start out knowing about the Russian whalers or the mysterious Russian spy who was found on the aircraft carrier, or the strange raid on the hospital where the guy was abducted, where the mysterious Russian spy was abducted from the operating room by some strangers who escaped from a lock elevator, So yeah, she keeps finding more and more weird stuff that leads her to, wait a minute, what the hell is going on here? And beyond that, and this is why also there's an antagonist. I realized it couldn't just be her retracing Gillian's steps and going, oh, she had pizza the night before, whatever. That's why after the first 3 or 4 chapters of her just having sort of nostalgic fun of her running around and talking to the garbage guys, pickup men, the plot starts thickening as she discovers that she is not the only person trying to find out what happened to Jillian back then, and that there are that she's got competition, and there are other people looking into this, and there are people who don't want her to looking into this. And then suddenly you've got a plot, so there's actually stuff going on besides the nostalgia trip of her running around in, where are they now, all the extras of, and each, like I tried to make it fact that she does, if you go back, she does learn something new that leads her to the next person. Oh, okay, there was some weirdness, she goes through, oh, so Jillian's trunk was found in the park. She knows that. Wait, they found this weird depression in the earth there? Wait, some garbage guys reported a UFO? So she keeps learning new things and steadily finding out that this, missing persons case is getting weirder and weirder and weirder. And then suddenly, like I said, the antagonist gets introduced and the authorities gets introduced, and there's sort of the deep throat character who knows more than he wants to let on. And so she's suddenly, like I said, there is actually, I like to think, progress being made here, and she is learning things and getting closer and closer to whatever strange, crazy stuff happened, even though she's, does not immediately embrace the idea that Jillian was abducted by aliens, but it gets increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence keeps pointing that direction, And without being too spoilerly, there is closure. She doesn't just, end up going home, She finds out more than she ever expected to know about what happened back then.
Yeah. I think I enjoyed that too because
it has consequences to her life.
Yes. Yeah. I enjoyed that 2024 kind of storyline too because I felt like all those things that we kind of questioned from watching the movie, you get to kind of go back and kind of play that role alongside the investigation there, and I think that was a lot of fun as a reader too. So I think folks will really enjoy that aspect. I do have to ask, because when you take the storyline and you have Starfleet and the Romulans and the Klingons, and they're these three big, huge, kind of foundational entities that we have in Trek, does it ever get overwhelming to write about those types of characters, or is it just fun to try and create something new?
Fun to try to create something new while also being consistent with what's been established before and doing my homework. For example, with Saavik, I went back and reread some of the early novels about Saavik from the 80s just to give me a better grounding. I've mentioned this before, but there's a book, The Pandora Principle by Carolyn Clovis, which gave me which is probably the definitive novel all about Saavik's origin story, her growing up half Romulan, half human, and all that. And I leaned very heavily into that, and that very much informed how I wrote, Saavik in the book. Similarly, I went back and reread Vonda McIntyre's novelization of Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, and I lifted stuff from that shamelessly. Because again, why reinvent the wheel if Vonda, when she wrote that novelization, fleshed out a lot of these minor bit characters. And I went back to see what she did with them, and was sort of the attitude of, again, why reinvent the wheel?
Right.
For example, the garbage guys who, who get glimpse the cloak ship landing in the park. Oh, well, they only have like I said, they're extras. They only have about 2 or 3 lines in the episode. The movie. In the novelization, Vonda fleshes them out. She gives them names, characters, backstories. I imported that whole hog from her novel because, again, Vonda established that one of was a guy named Javier who was an aspiring writer. Well, guess what? 40 years down the road, in my book, Javier is a published writer, because that was just me. And that's where research actually gives you ideas. Well, let me go back and see what Vonda did. Let me go back and see what Carolyn Klaus did, what she said about Savik's past and Savik's attitude towards Romulans. So yeah, that research gives you ideas, and that's sort of one way of, like you said, these characters have been done a lot. That's not a liability. You can go back and use that stuff.
Nice.
And
In terms
and
of
in the case of the Klingons, I gotta say, and again, one of my goals for this book was making sure that the three plot lines were always distinct and that the reader always knew where they were.
Mhm.
And besides putting, timestamps on all the chapters, it was the fact that my goal, at least, was that the TOS book feels very much like an action-packed old TOS book. And the Klingons in that storyline are very much nasty, mean TOS Klingons, in my head, they have Fu Manchu mustaches and grease paint,
Right.
on their faces, no bumps in their heads. And that was part of me just nostalgia, but also just so that, okay, you're in this storyline, Kirk is running around, his shirt's torn, he's punching people, the Klingons are nasty TOS Klingons, fine. And then you get into the movie era, and that has much more the feel of, say, Star Trek VI. It's political intrigue, and the Klingons are more like the Klingons we see in the movie. And so the idea was that each book had each timeline had kind of a tone. The Melinda storyline is a true crime investigation, police procedural thing. It gets very weird. The TOS adventure is very much a planet-side, classic sort of action-packed. This is TOS in its more sort of pulp adventure mode. And then the movie era should feel more like the movie era. And another reason for using Savik is, again, Savik is largely the protagonist of the movie era. She's the focus. That was, again, one of my goals there, was so that the reader would instantly know what storyline they were in. And if you open a chapter and that is illogical, Savik said, well, okay, if Savik is your point of view character, you instantly know you're not back in TOS era, and where everybody's wearing maroon uniforms, and so using Savik was one way of distinguishing the TOS storyline from the movie era storyline, because that instantly tells you you're in movie era.
As we're going through the book, I noticed that our antagonist's pet is called Enkidu, and I was there going, wait a second, I know that name from somewhere, and it was killing me to work out. I've heard that in Star Trek before, and it took me a while, and I realized, wait a second, isn't that the story that Picard tells Dayton in oh Lord, why can't I think of the name of the episode off the top of my head? Darmok, that's it. Yes. And I was there going, wait a second, that's it. Was it a reference to Darmok and obviously the story that Picard tells of Enkidu and Gilgamesh, or was it just completely separate, just random occurrence that it's, you wanted to tell the story of Gilgamesh and Enkidu when you were writing the book?
I will confess, Darmok never occurred to me. No. Enkidu is a reference to Gilgamesh because again, immortality and the quest for immortality became the major theme of the book. That's the theme of Gilgamesh, so of course I'm going to get literary here. And in fact, the book is packed with references to immortality.
Yeah.
Orlando Wilder, his name. Okay, Orlando comes from the Virginia Woolf story about an immortal woman. Orlando. Wilder was a play off Oscar Wilde, the picture of Dorian Gray. Yeah, so I was just doing the Star Trek thing of ransacking classic literature. So I admit, until you mentioned it, I completely forgot that Picard had referenced Gilgamesh in Darmok. But of course, like I said, it's Star Trek. People quote Shakespeare and Milton
all the time. Exactly.
So, when I was looking for names, there's a lot of I think the name of the evil corporation in the 2024 company was taken from some ancient myth regarding immortality as well. I was being self-consciously literary here. But Enkidu, I think eventually someone does mention, that was Gilgamesh's.
Yeah, they do, that's right, yeah.
EFF, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which I read in Humanities 101 in college back in the day, so.
I have to ask, because early on in the novel, uh, there's this the time where Kirk is taking the away team down to the planet. They're on the away mission to typical TOS episode storyline. But he says you're right that from Kirk's perspective that he'd always thought of the Prime Directive as a crucial moral compass, not a cage. And I love that line because I feel like, at least from my perspective, that's kind of the guiding principle for all of our Starfleet captains, isn't it? That this exists, but it's not something we hold concrete.
Thank you. I actually remember being very proud of that line.
It's a great line.
It's Kirk. There's a sort of sense that when you get into the TNG era, that you get the sense that they kind of are much more stricter about the Prime Directive, whereas Kirk kind of treats it, I'm not being too flippant, as kind of a guideline. It's an important moral compass, but if an asteroid's about to hit a planet and he can stop an entire race of people from being destroyed, he will fudge. It's important to keep in mind. It's very valuable. You don't want to play God, but Kirk does not treat it as a straitjacket. Whereas occasionally, when you get into the TNG era, they're perhaps a little bit more strict about, well, even if it means wiping out the planet, we can't interfere. But thank you. I thought that was a nice, pithy, sticker way to put it. Okay.
It was great, and I mean, I immediately thought of like Cisco and Janeway, who were like, they definitely lived on the outside edge of that Prime Directive many times. And I think it was even cool because I even thought of Picard in like the recent Picard series. Yeah. He lived a little bit more by that that guide too. So I really appreciated that line. I think that's something that will stick with me definitely for a while out of this novel.
Like if you think of the second season,
I actually will say, kind of going, yeah, I like that line. I remember that.
Yeah,
line.
That was great.
I was thinking of
I remember every sentence I wrote in that book, but I remember that one.
Good.
I was thinking of the Next Generation Season 2 episode, Pen Pals, when they have the discussion in Picard's quarters about the Prime Directive, and basically Picard is there going, shut up, everyone, we'd rather die than violate the Prime Directive under any circumstances. But as you said, Greg, as well, the original series, Kirk was a very different kind of prospect. Like, the rules existed, but if he decided that they weren't going to work for him, it was kind of, I just work around this here now altogether because it's the right thing to do. Greg, in terms of
it's a priority, but it's not the only priority.
Yes.
Greg, in terms of our antagonist in the book then, Orlando Wilder, what was your kind of intent with him? What kind of man did you want him to kind of be? Did you want him to be a mustache twirling kind of antagonist, or did you want him to be more nuanced and he was kind of just, he was trying to do a certain thing and just got lost along the way?
Well, that was sort of the idea. It would be up to readers to determine how much I pulled it off. The idea I had, and remember I wrote the book chronologically, was that he would get more ruthless as the book went on. That he started out from a good place, but after so many failures and defeats and being foiled, and he starts getting more. By the time you get to the third book, he's much more ruthless and cold-blooded than he was in the early chapters in 2024, and that was what I was going for, was a character arc. I bizarrely enough, I kind of had the weird idea of Peter Cushing in the Hammer Frankenstein movies, who, if you watch those films, he's kind of as the movies go on, and why do they keep all these damn villagers keep interfering with me, and I could still make it work. I've sacrificed so much, if I have to I'm going to make another monster, and this time it's going to work, and it's not going to go bad, and it's not going to... And so that was kind of the idea, was that he was supposed to start out, like I said, he had some humanitarian principles. He was not quite as ruthless as he... And in the end, he's kind of, again, without getting too spoiler, is kind of confronted with this fact, that he's kind of strayed from the path a bit. I mean, he was always kind of obsessed. He's your basic obsessed, scientist here, but he gets more ruthless as the book goes on, and after each successive being foiled, and it also just hundreds of years of him trying to find the secret of immortality and not quite doing it, and it escaping his grasp, and he's running out of time because, again, not to get too spoilery, he has found ways to extend his life. He is very long-lived, but 300 years have passed from the time Melinda meets him back in 2024 and Saavik running into him in, the movie era. So yeah, time is ticking for him, and he's getting more and more frustrated and impatient. And he's sacrificed. So at this point, there's sort of the sunk cost fallacy. He's sunk so much effort into and made so many sacrifices and done some bad things, in what he saw as pursuit of the greater good, that at this point, I can't give up now. I just, if it means, kidnapping, assassinations, whatever, he's, done too much, gone too far to back off now. And that was the character arc I had in mind.
I enjoyed the fact that he kind of says in 2292 to Melinda, and I love the way it was just put in there. It didn't need to be there, but I enjoyed that it was there, that when he meets Melinda again in the future in 2292, and he basically says to her, like, I basically went through rubble in 2268 to get your cryo chamber out of there and bring you with me again. And I thought that was just brilliant, because it just showed, again, even though how lost he's getting, this sense of a debt that he owed Melinda, that he was still willing to kind of do something like that, even though he himself was losing his own perspective.
Yeah, she's like become some sort of talisman for him, and he's also still, like I said, we're getting into heavy spoilers here. Yeah, she saved his life back in 2024, and she's also like his last tie back to his own era, even kind of, so. Yeah, he's very protective of Melinda, and so yeah, and she's the one who, in fact, tries to confront him with, you're not the man I knew back in 2024. What, for God's sakes, what's happened to you? You weren't like this back in 2024. Which I like to think dovetailed nicely in the end there, because because we are into spoiler territory. Yeah, like I said, her investigation you were asking earlier about ends in a dead end. Well, no, it has an ending, and she actually does solve the case in the end. It takes 300 years.
Right.
But she ends up in places she never imagined. But Melinda does, eventually actually solve the case and finish her podcast.
Right. I have to say, and I know I said at the beginning, but I enjoyed this book very much, and I think I was surprised because I wasn't sure what to expect out of a TOS storyline, and because obviously I grew up in the 90s era of, I shouldn't say grew up, I was fairly old, but when 90s era truck hit, that was kind of my focus. The TOS was reruns for me, right? Like I didn't get to experience that real time, but this felt so fresh and familiar, but new. And I hope that readers really embrace that from this novel, because it's fun. I would reread this novel in a heartbeat. And I think that's a testament to the care you took in the research, and yet being true to the characters. And I think the way the book is laid out, I know you wrote it chronologically, but the bouncing, kind of giving us that ABC storyline throughout was a lot of fun to read. So I'm curious, what do you hope readers take from this novel?
I hope, like I said, I'm gratified so far that, it seems to be warmly received. I mean, you can't please everybody, but no, it's right. And I hope that it will be, cool and neat. And like I said, my challenge at this point, after writing Star Trek for 30 plus years, is that I don't want to repeat myself.
Sure.
And I said, how do I keep it fresh for me? Because if it's not fresh for me, it won't be fresh for the reader. So I'm trying to do things I haven't done before and find new angles. And Lord knows I have written many TOS novels. The majority of my Star Trek novels are TOS novels.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how can I not write the same book over and over again? I never want to do that. So I'm going to keep, maybe that's why you thought it sounded fresh, because like I said, I'm trying to keep it fresh, for me. So I'm engaged and interested and not just, going through the motions, And this seemed like a really cool idea that I hadn't done before. So,
and Greg,
different kind of Star Trek novel.
What is next for you in terms of, say, non-Star Trek work? What are you kind of working on at the moment? Or can you even tell us is the next question?
But that's always a question. I have a few, stuff, irons in the fire that I can't talk about yet because, the nature of being a writer is you have outlines sitting on desks waiting for editors to say yay or nay. I can tell you that I'm continuing to write for Star Trek Explorer magazine. The magazine publishes short fiction. I actually have another story in issue 12, which should be coming out like any day now, and that's a Saavik story. In fact, that's not a coincidence. The magazine deliberately was aware of the fact that I had a novel coming out this summer, and they said, well, Greg, could you write kind of a tie-in story to the novel for the magazine in the interest of synergy? And so, I was kind of looking for what I could do to kind of, how about, there are different plots. You don't need to read the short story to read the novel or vice versa. But, how about Saavik? And people seem to be excited about Saavik being in the book. So, okay, I'm going to write a Saavik story that's set roughly around the same time as the novel. So that's coming out honestly, in a week or so. And just this morning, before I logged in to see you guys, I was doing final revisions on another TOS story that's supposed to come out in issue 14 of Star Trek Explorer. That's a classic TOS story. I'm not sure how much I'm supposed to talk about it, but it's 5 division stuff. And finally, this has not been officially announced yet, but I was given permission by my editor the other day to talk about it. I recently sold a great big 130,000 word original horror novel.
Wow.
Which will probably be coming out in 2025, 2026. Believe it or not, I'm actually quite chuffed about this, because believe it or not, this is actually my first original novel. As opposed to a Star Trek novel, a Batman novel, an Alias novel, a Godzilla novel, or whatever. Which I, of course, am thrilled to write because I'm a big old fanboy. But oddly enough, one of the odd holes in my schedule was occasionally I would be on podcasts like this, and people, so Greg, tell me about your original books. And I'd go, huh?
I'm losing you. The signal is going. Can you repeat that question?
On my bucket list was writing an original novel someday. And while I was stuck at home during the pandemic, honestly, it had time in my hands and the whole world was shut down. It's if I'm ever going to write an original novel, I should do it now. And it took me 65 years. But yes, I wrote a big original horror novel. I'm not sure if I can mention the publisher yet because they haven't announced it, but I was actually going off to a convention a couple of weeks ago when I called the editor and said, please, I'm going to a convention. Can I please talk about this at the convention, in the bar and everything? So he gave me permission to start talking it up. So it's currently, by the way, the book is written. It's currently sitting on a desk. I'm waiting for notes from the editor for revisions have to be done,
Brilliant.
That would probably 2025, 2026. I will be shouting this from the rooftops when it comes out. And in the meantime, I have outlines and proposals sitting on people's desks. But so I got 2 new Star Trek stories coming out. I got a big horror novel, which I will be able to talk about in the future. And I have other irons in the fire I'm not supposed to talk about.
Can you tell me then as well, obviously, this may be one of the irons in the fire. Is any of those irons in the fire another Star Trek book?
I would be very, very surprised if I did not write another Star Trek novel.
You have to get to 20.
Exactly. Exactly. At 19.
You can't leave it at 19. No, absolutely not.
Now, Greg, will you promise us that if it is another Star Trek book, that you'll come back on to us and talk to us about it again in years to come when it comes out?
Absolutely.
Greg, we always end these interviews with the same question, and you're going to be no different, and we're not going to let you away with it. Greg, this is an easy question. We ask every single guest this question, and it's completely a question that's personal to you. What does Star Trek mean to you?
Oh God, Star Trek has been that's such a big question, but it's been such a big part of my life for so long. But it's a cliche, but one of the great things about Star Trek is it's one of the few science fiction franchises out there that actually presents an optimistic view of the future. I say optimistic, not utopian. I'm an old crank. I sometimes think that modern fandom gets carried away with the whole utopian thing, which I grew up on the Wild West, adventures of TOS. But no, it's optimistic. It says we made it. It's a future that works. It is a future you would actually want to live in, as opposed to one where the apes have taken over, or a post-atomic Holocaust, or the Terminators, or whatever. And don't get me wrong, I like writing that kind of story too. I've written for those franchises, but Star Trek. Plus, honestly, socially, Star Trek is there's also a social factor. Honestly, Star Trek has brought a lot to me in my life. Like I said, I discovered science fiction fandom in college. Conventions are my happy place, getting out, getting together. I've met lots of friends, associates through Star Trek. It's, just a few weeks ago, I was at shore leave in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I was hanging out with such former guests of yours as Dayton Ward, Derek Accio, the usual gang. So Star Trek has been a huge, big part of my social life as well, and the whole community. Star Trek is a community. That's my answer. There you go. There's my bumper sticker. I beyond its optimistic vision of the future, which almost feels like a cliche to say, it's also provided me with a wonderful community which has enriched my life for long before I started writing stuff professionally.
Brilliant stuff, Greg. Thank you so much. So guys, the book Lost to Eternity is available now in all good bookstores and online and Kindle and things like that. Please do check it out. It is an absolutely brilliant read. It's one that you'll pick up and you will not be able to put down if you read it in stages of 3 chapters like I did, because that's the best way to read it. So guys, on behalf of Jody and myself, thank you so much. And on behalf of Greg as well, Greg, thank you so much for joining us. And again, please promise us when you write your next book that you'll come back onto us again to talk about it then.
Count on it.
Guys, thanks very much. Join us again next week for another episode of the Clonestar podcast. Until then, live long and prosper.